This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 66 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, I'm going to tell you why the next higher order thinking assignment in your classroom should be a curation project. If no one has ever encouraged, pushed, or insisted that you build more higher order thinking into your students' learning, it's possible you've been teaching in a cave. Higher level thinking has been a core value of educators for decades. We learned about it in college, we hear about it in PD, we're even evaluated on whether we're cultivating it in our classrooms. Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching, a widely used instrument to measure teacher effectiveness, describes a distinguished teacher as one whose lesson activities require high-level student thinking. All that aside, most teachers would say they want their students to be thinking on higher levels. That if our teaching kept students at the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy, simply recalling information, we wouldn't be doing a very good job as teachers. And yet, when it's time to plan the learning experiences that would have our students operating on higher levels, some of us come up short. We may not have a huge arsenal of ready-to-use high-level tasks to give our students. Instead, we often default to having students identify and define terms, label things, or answer basic recall questions. It's what we know. And we have so much content to cover, many of us might feel there really isn't enough time for the higher-level stuff anyway. If this sounds anything like you, I have a suggestion. Try a curation assignment. Now, before I get into all the details of what curation is and how we do it, I'd like to pause for a moment and tell you about a brand new online course I'm creating. The course is called Jumpstart, and it's designed for any teacher who wants to improve their technology skills but doesn't really know where to start. I've heard from so many of you that you want to use more tech in your classroom, but you just don't have the time to figure out which tools to use and then learn them. What I've done in Jumpstart is choose the 10 skills I think will give you the biggest bang for your buck. 10 highly flexible, versatile tech skills that if you learn them, you'll not only have a powerful toolbox for boosting learning in your classroom, you'll also gain a ton of confidence in your own ability to grow beyond those skills. The course is set up in 10 modules, each one focusing on a different skill with a hands-on project to do. So you learn the skill and a tech tool that puts the skill into practice. So, for example, in Module 2, which is called Collaborate, you learn how to use a program called Slack, an online discussion tool that is quickly replacing email in hundreds of companies. Once you learn how to have a discussion in Slack, you can use it to streamline your own communication with your colleagues or set up online student discussion groups. Or Module 5, which is called Demonstrate, you learn how to make a screencasting video. Once you've gotten this skill under your belt, you can use it over and over again to make your own course-based tutorials and teach students how to do the same for their own projects. In other modules, you'll practice using a digital curation tool, creating a flipped lesson, using a digital assessment tool, using digital mind mapping tools, and how to differentiate instruction by creating a HyperDoc playlist. At the time of this recording, I'm about 2 weeks from finishing the whole course, and I am so excited for you to see it. To learn more about the course and see if it's ready, visit teachersguidetotech.com/jumpstart. Okay, let's talk about curation. First of all, what is curation? When a museum director curates, she collects artifacts, organizes them into groups, sifts out everything but the most interesting or highest quality items, and shares those collections with the world. When an editor curates poems for an anthology, he does the same thing. The process can be applied to all kinds of content. A person could curate a collection of articles, images, videos, audio clips, essays, or a mixture of items that all share some common attribute or theme. When we're presented with a list of the top 10 anything or the best of something else, what we're looking at is a curated list. Those playlists we find on Spotify and Pandora, that's curation. Recommended for you videos on Netflix, curation. The news, yes, is curated. In an age where information is ubiquitous and impossible to consume all at once, We rely on the curation skills of others to help us process it all. In an educational setting, curation has a ton of potential as an academic task. Sure, we're used to assigning research projects where students have to gather resources, pull out information, and synthesize that information into a cohesive piece of writing. This kind of work is challenging and important, and it should remain as a core assignment throughout school. But how often do we make the collection of resources itself a standalone assignment? That is what I'm proposing we do. Curation projects have the potential to put our students to work at 3 different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. The first is the understand level, which is just one up from the remember level. And this is where we exemplify things and classify information. It can also have them working at the analyze level, where we distinguish relevant from irrelevant information and organize it in a way that makes sense. In a lot of cases, a curation assignment also has students work at the evaluate level, where we judge the quality of an item based on a set of criteria, because they're choosing things to include in their collection. Now, if we go beyond Bloom's and we consider the Framework for 21st Century Learning, which is put out by the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, we see that critical thinking is one of the 4 C's listed as an essential skill for students in the modern age, along with communication, creativity, and collaboration. A well-designed curation project requires a ton of critical thinking. So, we've established that the task of curating can use a lot of the skills that we want our kids to get practice with. So what would a curation project actually look like? Here is a sample task. Suppose you're teaching U.S. history, and you want students to understand that our Constitution is designed to be interpreted by the courts, and that many people interpret it differently. So you create a curation assignment that focuses on just the First Amendment. Here's the task. Students must choose one of the rights given to us by the First Amendment. To illustrate the different ways people might interpret that right, students must curate a collection of online articles, images, or videos that represent a range of beliefs about how far that right extends. For each example they include, they must summarize the point of view being presented and include a direct quote where the author or speaker's biases or beliefs can be inferred. And I actually created a little model of this, of this type of an assignment. So if you go to cultofpedagogy.com/pod and click on episode 66, that'll take you to the blog post where you can actually look at the example. It's a collection of 5 different articles. It's actually 3 articles and 2 videos, and there's a little written commentary underneath each one. So you can see how that looks when it's all put together. In this type of an assignment, because students are finding examples of a given concept and doing some summarizing, the students are working at the understand level of Bloom's. But because they're also identifying where the author or speaker is showing bias or purpose, this is also working at the analyze level. So that's just one example. Here are a couple of other ideas for projects that you could do with curation. And so many of these really could fit into any subject area, which is what I really love about them. The first idea is a ranked collection. That's R-A-N-K-E-D, ranked. Students in this project would collect a set of articles, images, videos, or even whole websites based on a set of criteria. So, for example, the most, quote, literary song lyrics of the year, or the world's weirdest animal adaptations, and then rank them in some kind of order, justifying their rankings with a written explanation or even a student-created scoring system. Now, each student could be tasked with creating their own collection, or the whole class could be given a pre-selected collection to rank. This would be followed by a discussion where students could compare and justify their rankings with those of other students. Another idea would be a shared trait collection. This would house items that have one thing in common. This kind of task would work in so many different subject areas. Students could collect articles where our government's system of checks and balances are illustrated, or images of painting in the Impressionist style, or videos that play songs whose titles use metaphors. It could even be used as part of a lesson using the concept attainment strategy, where students develop an understanding of a complex idea by studying yes and no examples of something, And then you could give them a curation assignment where they have to curate their own examples of studying of that concept. And then this will further develop their understanding of that. A third type of curation assignment would be a literature review. This could be the first step of a research project, where students collect relevant resources and provide a brief summary of each one, explaining how it contributes to the current understanding of their topic. Now, as high school students prepare for college, having a basic understanding of what a literature review is and the purpose it serves, even if they're only doing it with articles written outside of academia, will help them take on the real thing with confidence when that time comes. I can imagine a lot of college professors would be grateful to have their high school students arriving in college saying, yeah, we've done literature reviews before, or something like them, to even be familiar with the concept. I think in college was the first time I ever heard the term literature review, so that would be another idea. Another idea would be a video playlist. YouTube is bursting at the seams with videos, but how much of it is actually good? Have students take chunks of your content and curate the best videos out there to help other students understand those concepts. In the item's description, have students explain why they chose it and what other students will get out of it. Another idea would be a museum exhibit. Task students with curating a digital exhibit around a given theme. The more complex the theme, the more challenging the task. So, for example, they might be asked to assume the role of a museum owner who hates bees. Give them a bias. And this person wants to create a museum exhibit that teaches visitors all about the dangers of bees. Maybe you could give another group the task of designing a museum exhibit from the perspective of somebody who loves them and wants people to not be afraid of them. And you could compare these two to show how much bias influences the work that people do. This kind of work would help students understand that even institutions that might not own up to any particular bias, like museums, news agencies, or TV stations, will still be influenced by their own biases in how they curate their material. Another example of a curated collection would be real-world examples. Take any content you're teaching, such as geometry principles or grammar errors or science or social studies concepts, and have students find images or articles that illustrate that concept in the real world. And one final idea is to have students create lists of favorites. Have them pull together a personal collection of favorite articles, videos, or other resources, maybe for a Genius Hour project, an advisory project, or even something more personal, like a collection of items to cheer you up or stuff to boost your confidence. Although this could easily slide outside the realm of academic work, it would make a nice activity to help students get to know each other at the start of the school year, or give them practice with the process of curation before applying it to more content-related topics. So those are just some ideas for the types of projects that you could do. Here's another sort of piece of advice. This is the thing that will really take it from just a quick assignment to something that really is higher level thinking. Add a writing component to it. Most of these activities would not be very academically challenging if students merely had to assemble a collection. But adding a thoughtfully designed written component is what will make students do their best thinking in a curation assignment. The simplest way to do this is to require a written commentary with each item in the collection. Think about those little signs that accompany every item at a museum. Usually when you walk into an exhibit, you find a sign or display that explains the exhibit as a whole, then smaller individual placards that help visitors understand the significance of each piece in the collection. These are all writing pieces. So when students put their own collections together, they should do the same thing. Be specific about what you'd like to see in these short writing pieces and include those requirements in your rubric. Then go a step further and create a model of your own so students have a clear picture of how the final product should look. Because this is a genre they have probably not done any work in before, they'll do much better with this kind of scaffolding. Also, doing the assignment yourself first, a practice I like to call dog fooding, will also help you identify flaws in the assignment that can be tweaked before you hand it over to students. So let's talk about the kind of digital curation tools that you could use for these kinds of assignments. It's definitely possible for students to collect resources through non-digital means by reading books in the library or curating physical artifacts or objects. But doing a curation project digitally allows for media-rich collections that can be found and assembled in a fraction of the time it would take to do them physically. And if you have students curating in groups, using digital tools will allow them to collaborate from home without having to meet in person. So here are a few curation tools that would work beautifully for this kind of project. The first is called eLink, and their URL is elink.io. And this is the tool that I use in the sample project. It's very, very simple. You just collect your links and they sort of put them all onto this single web page. You write your descriptions and then you just end up with a single unique URL that you can share with anyone. It's just really, really simple. Another tool is Pinterest, which is probably the most popular curation tool out there. If your students are already using Pinterest, or if you're willing to get them started on it, you could have them create a Pinterest board as a curation assignment. Another tool is called Symbaloo. This is Symbaloo, and I believe that is also .com. Let me quickly look at this. And actually, I've got it at symbalooedu.com because they've got an edu version. This is like a bookmarking tool. You have a screen that's called a web mix, which is just a bunch of little tiles like chiclets. And you click on each tile and it sends you to a different website or URL. The only limitation of Symbaloo is that there's not really much of a writing option. And so if you wanted to have kids write descriptions, they would probably need to do it on a separate document. So Symbaloo might be more appropriate for an assignment where you're not trying to get high-level thinking, but letting kids, collect favorites or that sort of thing. A final tool that you might be interested in, especially if you're doing something that's a little bit more academic and is not going to be requiring, a lot of images or anything like that, would be a tool called Diigo. It's DIIGO.com. And Diigo, it's a combination of a way to curate resources and also take pretty extensive notes on them. So this would be good for something like a literature review or a general collection of resources at the beginning stages of a research project. Not something where you want to include a lot of images. It doesn't have really great user-friendly supports for that kind of stuff. So those are just a couple of tools that you could use in these projects. I am so excited about all the different ways that we can use curation in the classroom, and I would love to hear your ideas as well. If you have another idea for a curation project, please come over to the blog post that I have up for this podcast and share it. To do that, and to find links to all the resources mentioned in this episode, visit cultofpedagogy.com/pod, click on episode 66. To get weekly updates on all my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving me a review on iTunes. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day. This podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. To learn more, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.